Arizona Territory, 1878. The heat clung to the skin like a warning, and the town of Ash Bluff sat still and sun-bleached under the weight of its own silence. Noah Adelaide stood barefoot in the dust, arms clutched around herself, her cotton dress faded and torn at the hem. She was 20 and had never been kissed, never been held like she was worth the breath in her lungs. Her father, Lyle Adelaide, stood 3 feet away, eyes low, sweat soaking through his collar. His voice was hoarse and empty. "Debt's a noose, girl." "I got no choice." The men circled like buzzards in the dry yard behind the saloon. Lyle had rounded them up like livestock buyers, whiskey breath, greedy eyes. The only thing separating Noah from being hauled off like a mule was the highest bid. Her heart pounded, but her face did not flinch. Not anymore. She had stopped begging the moment her father spit the words. "She's strong, works hard, 18 last winter." A ranch hand offered $50. A shopkeep in Prescott upped it to 75, then a man in a stained suit and gold tooth stepped forward, his voice slick. 150, cash, the crowd murmured. Lyle twitched. That was when a new voice cut through like clean steel. 200, heads turned. A tall man, lean and dust-covered, stood at the edge of the circle. Wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but his voice was steady. "Cash." "Right now?" The man stepped forward, boots crunching gravel. His name was Thayer Knox. People knew him from the cattle drives near Camp Verde, quiet but fair. Rode solo, paid in coin, not promises. The gold-toothed man scoffed. "You serious, cowboy?" Thayer's eyes didn't leave Noah's. 300. Lyle's jaw dropped. He looked at Noah, then at the money bag Thayer pulled from his saddle. "Deal." Thayer handed over the coins without a word, then turned to Noah. "You are free." She stared at him, breath caught in her throat. "What? I did not buy you," Thayer said. "I bought your choice." She blinked hard, her hands trembling. "So what happens now? You come with me if you want, or walk away free. No one owns you." She looked at her father. He was already counting coins, not even pretending to care. Noah stepped toward Thayer. Her chin lifted even as her knees shook. "I will come with you," he nodded once. "All right." They rode out before the sun dipped behind the red cliffs, her on the back of his mare, arms wrapped around his waist. He said little, but when he helped her mount, his hands were gentle, careful. They made camp near Oak Creek, where the water ran cold and fast. Thayer cooked beans over a small fire. Noah sat across from him, knees pulled up to her chest. "You do not even know me," she said eventually. "I know what I saw," he said. "And I was not going to let it happen. You could have left. Let someone else take me." He looked at her then, eyes steady. "That is not the kind of man I am." She believed him. When she lay down that night on the bedroll he offered, she stared up at the stars. Her heart was still racing, but for the first time in a long while it was not from fear. It was relief. A strange, quiet hope curled inside her. In the days that followed, they traveled slow. Thayer was headed back to his small ranch near the Verde River. He offered her the empty bunkhouse, said she could stay as long as she needed. "You can leave whenever you want," he reminded her. "I know," she said, but she did not want to leave. Noah worked in the garden behind the house, sewed curtains for the bunkhouse, mended Thayer's shirts. At night, they ate together on the porch, watching the sun burn gold across the hills. He listened when she spoke, never rushed her. She noticed how he always asked before touching anything of hers, even a dropped shawl. He never looked at her like she was something to be claimed. But he looked at her one evening after they fixed a broken fence. She handed him a tin cup of water. Their fingers brushed. She felt it then, the pull, low and warm in her chest. She met his eyes. "I never thought I would be safe again," she said softly. "You are safe here, Noah," he said. "And you always will be." Her throat tightened. "I believe you." He reached out, slow and sure, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Good." Neither of them moved for a long moment, and when she finally leaned forward, resting her head against his chest, he let her stay there. Later that night, she sat by the fire while Thayer cleaned his rifle. She watched the way his jaw shifted in thought, the way his hands moved with care. "You never asked why I did it," he said. Noah looked at him. "Why did you?" He set the rifle down. "Because no one ever did for my sister. She was sold off to settle a debt when I was 15. I never got to stop it." Noah's heart ached at the pain behind his voice. "I lost her," he went on. I swore I would not let it happen again, not if I could help it. She stood, crossed the room, and knelt before him. You did not lose me. His eyes met hers. No, I did not. Before she could stop herself, she kissed him. Gentle at first, unsure. But he kissed her back steady and deep, like he had been holding it in for weeks. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I never wanted anything I had to steal, he whispered. You did not steal me, she said. You saved me. And as the fire crackled behind them, she knew she was not going anywhere. The morning sun rose pale and slow, casting soft light through the slats of the bunkhouse window. Noah sat at the small table Thayer had built from pine, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of chicory. The fire had long since died, but the air still held the scent of cedar smoke and damp earth. She listened to the faint rustle of movement outside, boots on gravel, the creak of leather straps, a horse shifting weight. She stepped out quietly, the door clicking shut behind her. Thayer stood near the corral, brushing down his gelding with long, even strokes. His sleeves were rolled past his elbows, revealing strong forearms dusted with trail dirt. He looked up when she approached, his expression unreadable but not closed. Did the river flood last spring? She asked, nodding toward the low-lying reeds beyond the fence. Worse than usual, he said. Took out the footbridge, had to haul fence posts near to a mile. Is that why the pasture's cut in two? He nodded once, still working out how to reroute it. She leaned against the fence, watching a swallow dart low over the grass. I could help with that, his eyes flicked to hers. Fence mending's hard on the hands. I've done worse, and I don't scare easy. He didn't argue. Instead, he handed her a hammer from a nearby crate. We'll need cedar rails, not pine. Coyotes chew through pine like it's biscuit. They walked together into the trees east of the house. The woods were quiet, save for the occasional chirr of a cricket or the snap of twigs underfoot. Thayer carried the saw, and she followed with the rope and iron pegs. When they reached a stand of cedar, he knelt beside a trunk and passed her the blade. You ever cut timber? No. But I can learn. He placed her hands on the grip, adjusted her stance. Let the saw do the work, don't muscle it. They worked in rhythm, trading off, sweat gathering at her temples and soaking into her collar. By midday, they had 5 rails cut and bundled. She sat back against a rock, catching her breath. Thayer handed her a canteen. You don't quit. I never had the choice. He sat beside her. You do now. She looked at him then, the sun catching in the green flecks of his eyes. I don't want to be idle. If I stay here, I want to pull my weight. You already do. The words settled between them, quiet and certain. Later, after the fence was patched and the tools stowed, she rinsed her hands at the pump and watched the water spiral away into the dust. Her palms were raw, one slightly blistered. She didn't complain. That night, she helped Thayer bring in a calf that had wandered too far from its mother. The animal was spooked, its leg caught in a snarl of brush. Thayer moved slow and calm, whispering under his breath while Noah untangled the leg. The calf bleated once, then quieted. You've got a way with creatures, he said as they guided it back. She glanced at him. They make more sense than people. Hard to argue that. When they returned to the house, the sky was turning to ash and indigo. He lit a lantern while she spooned stew into 2 bowls. They ate in silence, the kind that didn't press or weigh. Afterward, she lingered by the hearth while he checked the door latches. She traced her fingers along the mantel where a small wooden carving rested an elk, worn smooth with time. You make this? She asked. My father did, still alive. No, she nodded, not asking more. Instead, she lifted the carving gently. He was good. He had quiet hands, made things last. She set it back carefully. You do too. He turned, his gaze steady. Don't say things you don't mean. I don't. He crossed the room, slow. I keep waiting for you to say you regret staying. I don't. You could leave tomorrow. I won't. His jaw shifted, tension leaving his shoulders. All right. She took a step closer. You think I'm only here because you rescued me. You're not. No, I'm here because I want to build something with someone who sees me. He reached for her then, not rushed, not uncertain. His fingers curled gently around hers. I see you, Noah. She leaned in, breath warm against his shirt front. Then don't look away. He didn't. A week passed, then another. The land warmed with late spring, the mesquite budding pale green along the creek and the soil softening beneath their steps. Mornings came with birdsong and the lowing of cattle, and nights settled with a hush that made every breath feel shared. Noah carried a basket across the field behind the house, her skirts brushing the tops of the wild barley. She'd found a patch of wild onion and dug it carefully, fingers deep in the loam. As she returned, she spotted Thayer near the barn, hauling a plank across his shoulder. He paused at the sight of her, not because of the basket, but because she was smiling full and without hesitation. "You ever built a smokehouse?" he asked as she neared. "No," she said, setting the basket down, "but I'd like to learn." He nodded toward a pile of stones and rough timber. "We'll need it come midsummer. Meat won't keep past a day otherwise." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Tell me what to do." They worked through the afternoon, shaping the foundation with flat stones pulled from the dry creek. Thayer showed her how to wedge them tight, so the walls would keep smoke in but rain out. When her palms began to ache, she shifted to cutting kindling, and he said nothing, just handed her his knife and kept stacking. "You ever think about what comes after all this?" she asked as the sun dipped low. He set down a beam. After the fences are up. After the winter stores are filled, after all the fixing's done." He straightened, brushing sawdust from his shirt. "Ain't sure anything's ever really done." She tilted her head. "That's not what I meant." He looked at her then, quiet for a long time. "I think about what it'd be like to not eat alone, to wake up knowing someone's still there." Noah's voice dropped low. "I think about that too." Neither of them moved to close the distance. It wasn't hesitation, it was patience. The kind that grows when two people understand the value in waiting for the right moment. Later that week, they rode out to a neighboring homestead where a widow named Mrs. Hensley bartered seeds and dried apples. Noah traded a spool of dyed thread she'd found tucked in the back of Thayer's storeroom, and Mrs. Hensley, sharp-eyed and silver-haired, gave her a jar of pickled carrots in return. "Your husband treats you well," the older woman said as she handed over the jar. "He's not my husband," Noah said, the words catching somewhere between discomfort and hope. The woman arched a brow. "Could have fooled me. He watches you like a man who's already chosen." Back at the ranch, she mentioned it when they were folding linens together in the lean-to. "Mrs. Hensley thinks you're already married to me," she said, half laughing. Thayer didn't look up. "Maybe not in paper." She stilled, the cloth slipping from her hand. "What do you mean?" "I mean I've been thinking about what comes after too. And if you want me, I'd ask proper." Her throat tightened. "You don't have to rescue me twice." "I'm not rescuing, I'm offering." He finally met her eyes. "But only if it's something you want." She stepped closer, laying a hand on his chest. "It is." He rested his hand over hers. "Then we'll do it honest. When the preacher makes his way through in July, we'll speak our vows." She nodded, slow but sure. "I'll make a dress. I'll build a table big enough for two." That night she lay in the bed he'd made for her months before, the cotton quilt tucked around her shoulders. She listened to the wind move through the trees and let the stillness settle deep. For the first time in her memory, the future wasn't a question she feared. It was something she could shape with her own hands alongside his. The July sun rode high above the red ridges, baking the ground with a dry, steady hand. Noah stood in the doorway of the main house, holding a strip of muslin against her waist, eyes narrowed in concentration. The fabric was creased from hours of reworking, but her stitches had grown surer, her fingers faster. She'd never made a dress from start to finish, certainly not her own wedding dress, but she was determined it would fit her exactly as she wanted, clean and simple, without frill or lace to weigh it down. Thayer had gone into Clarkdale with the mule cart at first light, trading for flour and a length of tin to patch the smokehouse roof. He'd promised to be back by dusk, and though Noah trusted his word without question, she still found herself turning toward the road each time the wind shifted. She stepped outside and crossed to the patch of earth she'd cleared behind the bunkhouse. The rows of beans and squash were coming in strong, and she knelt to thin the shoots, dirt catching beneath her nails. A grasshopper sprang from the edge of a leaf and landed on her arm, and she let it sit, studying the way its legs folded tight before it leapt again. When the sound of wheels hit the ridge, her heart lifted. She rose, brushing her palms against her skirt, and shaded her eyes. Thayer halted the cart just beyond the well. He looked dusty and tired, but his gaze found hers without delay. "I brought you something," he said, climbing down and reaching behind the sacks. She took the package he held out, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Inside was a pair of soft leather shoes, plain but well made. She ran a thumb over the stitching. "I never said I needed shoes." "You didn't, but I noticed you've been favoring your right foot in the mornings." Noah's throat tightened. "You notice more than I expect." "I pay attention," he said simply. They stood in the shade of the porch as the day began to lean into evening. She reached up, brushing a curl from her temple. "Did you always plan to live this far from town?" "I did," he said. "Noise never sat right with me. I like quiet that stays quiet." "And you never felt lonely," he met her eyes. "I did, but I'd rather be alone than in the wrong company." She nodded slowly. "I used to wonder if I'd be alone forever, not out of choice, just forgotten. Like something left behind." "You weren't meant to be forgotten," he said. "Not by anyone worth remembering." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the cottonwoods near the creek. She stepped closer, resting her hand lightly on his chest. "You still want to marry me?" He didn't hesitate. "I do." She looked up at him, her voice steady. "Then let's do it before the preacher even gets here. I don't need a sermon, I just need you." "I was thinking the same," he said, his hand settling over hers. "There's a ridge behind the house, the one that looks out toward Mingus Mountain. We'll say our vows there, just us." "Tomorrow, then," she said. "I'll finish the dress tonight." That evening she worked by lamplight, her fingers moving with purpose. Thayer sanded a new cedar bench beside the hearth, quiet but humming low under his breath, a sound she hadn't heard before, and one that made something settle inside her. The next morning they rose before sunrise and walked out together, hand in hand, through the tall grass still wet with dew. Thayer carried a folded blanket and a ring he'd carved from bone and silver wire. Noah wore the muslin dress, her hair braided and tied with a blue ribbon she'd found in the back of a drawer. They stood facing each other as the sun crested the far peaks. No words were written down, no witnesses to speak them aloud, but neither needed help to know what to say. "I vow to never keep you," he said, voice low, "only to walk beside you wherever you choose." "I vow to never turn from you," she said, "even when the trail gets hard." "Especially then." He slid the ring onto her finger and she lifted her face to him. When he kissed her, it was not a promise of more to come or a seal to mark what was done. It was the quiet joining of two people who had already chosen, again and again. They stayed on the ridge long after the sun had risen, sitting side by side with their backs to the warm stone. Below, the ranch waited, the fences, the smokehouse, the fields just beginning to grow. "We'll need a second chair for the porch," she said. "I'll build one this week," he replied. With arms that matched the first, she leaned her head against his shoulder. "Good, we've got a lot of watching to do." And in the hush of the morning, with the land stretching wide around them, they watched the day begin, together. The rains came late that year, not until the cottonwoods had already begun to yellow. The first storm rolled through with sharp wind and a low rumble that stirred up the scent of sage and turned the Verd River to silt and foam. Noah stood beneath the porch roof, her apron damp from carrying in the last of the laundry, and listened to the thunder stretch across the hills. Inside, Thayer was oiling the hinges of the pantry door. He glanced up as she stepped in, loosened her shawl, and hung it to dry. "I'll need to ride out to check the south fence in the morning," he said. "Last time it rained like this, the creek overran and bent half the posts." She pulled her damp sleeves back. "I'll come with you. Ground'll be soft, easier to straighten them while it's wet." He set down the oilcloth. "You sure you want to slog through that mess?" "Long as I've got boots and daylight, I can handle it." He didn't argue. He rarely did, not when she spoke like she meant it. That evening they sat near the hearth, a pot of parched corn warming between them. She reached into the cedar chest and pulled out a folded square of linen, her needle already threaded. "I was thinking," she said, running her thumb along the hem, "about making something for the baby, for when the time comes." Thayer's brow lifted. "You're sure?" She nodded once. I've known a few weeks. I waited to say it until it felt real. He reached for her hand, rough thumb brushing her knuckles. You all right? I'm all right, she said. Tired more than usual, but it's not a bad kind of tired. He was quiet, but his grip on her hand tightened just a little. That's good. That's real good. They didn't say much after that. He added a log to the fire and she stitched in silence, the flame throwing pale light across her belly, still flat but full with promise. The next morning they rode out early, the sky overcast but calm. The path along the south fence was slippery, the red clay pulling at their boots, but the posts had held better than expected. Only two needed resetting. While Thayer drove the new stakes into place, Noah gathered the wire and sorted the knots. She moved slow, mindful of her balance, and he didn't rush her. You ever think about where you'd be if you hadn't come through Ash Bluff that day? She asked, winding the wire into a coil. He paused, resting a hand on the fence rail. I try not to. Feels like tempting fate. She leaned on the post beside him. It's strange, isn't it, how one turn of a horse can change the shape of your whole life. I'd been planning to go east that week, he said. Thought maybe I'd see the Gulf, maybe find work down by the rail lines. But the horse threw a shoe and I ended up staying near Camp Verde. She looked at him, smile faint and sure. I'm glad he threw that shoe. Me too, he said. More than I can say. By the time they returned to the house, her shoulders ached and her thighs were sore from riding, but she felt clear-headed, like something had settled into place. She washed at the basin, then sat with a jar of sweet pickles and the mending basket while Thayer lit the lamps. That night, he read aloud from a worn book of farm almanacs, his voice steady even when the ink ran thin. She rested her head in his lap, her hand curled around his knee, and listened to the way he lingered over the words about planting signs and frost warnings. I like hearing you read, she murmured. I like reading when you're near, he said. When the first frost came, they stacked the last of the firewood and stored what they could in glass jars and canvas sacks. She made a cradle from an old apple crate, sanding the edges smooth and lining it with wool from the neighbor's flock. Thayer built shelves in the main room and hung a thick curtain between the bedroom and the hearth. They didn't talk much about what was coming, but their hands never stopped moving. Each nail, each stitch, each quiet glance passed between them like a promise. As the year drew down and the days shortened, the land turned silver with frost, and the nights held stillness like breath held deep and steady. On the morning she woke with the first true pains, the sky outside was pale and cold. Thayer was already up, stoking the fire and boiling water. He didn't panic. He wrapped her in a quilt, laid her on the bed, and held her hand through every moment, his palm warm and unmoving. The midwife arrived by noon, her hands quick and sure, and by nightfall, Noah held their daughter against her chest, her skin flushed and slick, her cries strong enough to fill the rafters. She's got your mouth, Thayer said, brushing a finger along the baby's cheek. She's got your eyes, Noah whispered, and you're quiet. They named her Clara after Thayer's mother, though neither said it aloud at the time. It was just understood. Snow came late that winter, light and dry. The world outside turned soft and white, and the house smelled of bread and pine. Noah rocked Clara by the hearth while Thayer carved a rattle from pecan wood. The baby watched him from her basket with wide, unblinking curiosity. One evening in February, Noah stood at the window, Clara sleeping against her shoulder. Thayer came up behind her, resting a hand at her back. We built a good life, she said. We did, he replied, and we'll keep building. She turned, laying her head against his chest. Whatever comes, you're my home. He kissed the top of her head, his arms settling around her. And you're mine. Outside, the wind moved through the bare trees, and inside, the fire burned low but steady. Their lives, once shaped by loss and silence, now turned with warmth and the kind of love that needed no speaking. They did not look back. Not anymore. There was only forward and always together.